We should follow the example of a North Miami woman named Desaline Victor. When Desaline arrived at her polling place, she was told the wait to vote might be 6 hours. As time ticked by, her concern was not with her tired body or aching feet, but whether folks like her would get to have their say. And hour after hour, a throng of people stayed in line to support her. Because Desaline is 102 years old. And they erupted in cheers when she finally put on a sticker that read, "I voted."
Welcome back to Hardball. Was that moment in Barack Obama's State of the Union message that the efforts of voter disenfranchisement that took place in the 2012 election got a face, a 102-year-old face. A citizen's right to vote is protected by the Voting Rights Act these days. And in the 9 states highlighted here, you can see them on the map, and dozens of counties and municipalities in many states, a part of the Voting Rights Act called Section 5 requires that any changes that will affect voting in those places must first be cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice. But as this headline in today's New York Times shows, this part of the Voting Rights Act is being challenged today as, quote, a cure the South has outgrown. But given the efforts at voter disenfranchisement in this past election, it's not clear that the patient is cured. I don't think it is. And this map shows the states that have made it harder to vote since 2010. A lot of northern states, by the way, either by cutting back early voting, requiring photo ID cards, or restricting voter registration drives. Joining me right now is an expert. Well, first of all, we have a journalist, MSNBC contributor Joan Walsh. She's like me. And Judith Browne Dianis of the Advancement Project. I want to start, Joan. Welcome, Joan, and happy Mattress Day. I'm not sure what we celebrate today besides selling mattresses. But I don't know how that ever happened, by the way. But let's talk about this very serious topic with Judith. By the way, congratulations, Judith, on bringing that wonderful woman at 102 up to Washington. She waited in line how many hours?
Yeah, she waited in line 3 hours standing. It was a 6-hour wait, and she was told to come back after the 3-hour wait.
Okay, one of the great things that LBJ did after the death of Kennedy in the mid-'60s was the Voting Rights Act. First of all, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. One was public accommodations, which is a big deal because it meant all the stores and all the gas stations and all the hotels were open nationwide to anybody regardless of color, no matter what the owner thought. Okay, and then the Voting Rights Act was an attempt to give real power to black people by saying, look, if you want power down the road in any area, you got to vote.
Right.
And you couldn't vote in the South.
Right.
Because what was the reason most people were kept from voting, the reason for the Voting Rights Act? What were the tricks used?
Well, it was the poll taxes where you had to pay to vote. You had grandfather clauses that said that certain people could vote if they had done something, they had land at a particular time. And then you had literacy tests where you had to read and pass a test in order to vote. And the Voting Rights Act outlawed that. I mean, it really was, the Voting Rights Act really is our statute that ensures that the 15th Amendment to the Constitution is guaranteed, but also guarantees the fact that we are all equal in this country.
And now today, just to continue with your expertise, so many states, including my own where I grew up in Pennsylvania, have pulled these numbers where let's come out with a real ID card or something. It's going to be so hard to come up with, people in their 70s or 80s are not going to be able to get one. Court struck that down. How does that play into this, these efforts in places like Florida to do these kind of tricks?
Right. Well, it clearly shows that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is still needed because, in fact, we saw states making it harder for particular groups of people, like African Americans and Latinos, to vote in this election. And so those laws, for example, in Texas and South Carolina, those laws, those voter ID laws, were put on hold specifically because Section 5 came into act, and actually the Department of Justice objected to those laws.
Joan, you and I talk generally about politics, and the thing we talk about a lot, you and I, is this new sort of civil war, or rather continual civil war in this country, where a lot of people on the right would like to keep it going. When they want to fight, they call it the cause still, you hear it. They want to fight the federal government. They like states' rights. They like secession. They like nullification. They like setting their own voting rules because they want to have the same thing they had once before, which is mainly a higher proportion of whites making the calls.
Well, right. And what we've seen now is it's not restricted to the South. It's still going on a lot in the South. That list of states that you showed, Chris, that showed, people who made it harder to vote. There were a lot of southern states that are still covered by Section 5. But we know that there were also northern states as well. And in a better world, I suppose, you'd extend Section 5. You certainly wouldn't cut it back. So, Alabama has a point in one sense when it says, hey, we're not the only ones. I don't know if they're the worst. This is something. And sadly, it is something that's become become really a partisan thing, because we all remember that while LBJ and JFK were Democrats, they were new Democrats. The Democratic Party had a shameful history in terms of voting rights suppression, and they were fighting Democratic governors in the South. And they also relied on the votes of Republican senators and Congress people in the North. So the parties sort of switched sides, and now you have North and South Republican governors, not Democratic governors, Republican state legislators working hard to disenfranchise black voters, but also sort of the Obama coalition. So not only African Americans, but Latinos, younger voters, poorer voters, and in states like Florida where older people vote Democratic, older people too. It's really a pervasive and pernicious new crusade.
Joan, to make your point, here's Mike Turzai, the Republican leader in Pennsylvania, the legislature, admitting basically that the reason they're making the laws tougher, setting up the voting ID system, photo voter ID, is to win the election. Let's watch.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
Judith, I was thinking that, there's a lot of polarization on both sides, left and right, black and white in this election. Obviously, the first African-American president is going to do incredibly well among African-Americans, first time ever. It always is the first one that gets all the votes practically. But I was thinking in Alabama and Mississippi. Mississippi's like 85% of the white vote went for Romney, 89% of Alabama. So if you can repress the black vote down there, and make it irrelevant.
That's right. I mean, this is why we have to have the Voting Rights Act, because we know that racially polarized voting still happens. Black people will, actually have always had a history of voting for black and white candidates, right? White people, and especially in the South, still vote for white candidates. And so we have to have these laws in place that get us to free, fair, and accessible elections. And Section 5 is one of those. The Voting Rights Act has been key to breaking down and making sure that these laws that would take away the right to vote actually don't get implemented.
Well, you know what I was thinking again about the demographic fight I'm going to talk about at the end of the show tonight. If President Obama does have a political strategy to rebuild the Democratic Party as the dominant political party in the country, and his plan is to use demographic shifts as part of that, Hispanics especially, and young people, and the issues of marriage equality and things like that, to really shift the demographics in this country to his effect. This issue is the heart of it, isn't it, Joan? I mean, they're fighting it. They see what he's doing, and they're going to try to fight it by getting rid of the Voting Rights Act.
He knows that this issue is the heart of it, and they know it maybe even better. And that's why we've seen such a backlash, especially just since 2008, really, Chris, where these tactics have moved north, and you have states like Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania doing it too. So we need to be more vigilant, not less.
The funny thing, the whole country's on the same page. They know exactly what's fighting. Both sides know exactly the stakes. They know exactly the trend of history, and both are dealing with, one's riding the trend of history, Obama, the others are fighting it. Yep. And we all know what we're doing. Thank you very much, Joan Walsh. Thank you very much, Judith Browne Dianis. And a great get the other night, bringing that lady up. As we say in our business, great get. Up next on the President's Day agenda tonight, presidential rivals. This is going to be fun. Bush versus his father, W versus HW, for their place in history. And, of course, the old question we always ask, are Bill Clinton and Barack Obama on the same side? This is Hardball, the place for politics.